Hey, hi, hello there. We are outside in the beautiful fall nature world that is Berwyn Park, because it's pretty here. But today I wanted to start talking about a topic that you hear fat acceptance and the Health at Every Size bring up on occasion because they don't have the ability to do basic research. And that is the Minnesota Starvation Project. And you will routinely hear them bring it up as like proof that dieting is starving. But the reality of the situation is the Minnesota Starvation Project was not a study on dieting or the effects of long-term dieting or crash dieting. It was a study on starvation. The reason for the study is in the title. And the reason why I say that the FA people, the FA and the HAES people can't be bothered to do basic research is, if they had, they would understand that this project does not support the arguments that they keep trying to use it for, which is that cutting your calories to 1,800 calories in a day is somehow going to kill you. First off, no one in this project died, though there were some damaging long-term effects. Because it was a starvation project. Now, a experiment like the Minnesota Starvation Project probably could not be done today simply because of the morals, simply because of the ethics that we have today towards human studies. And the reason for the Starvation Project was actually fairly severe. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I get really irritated when I hear the FA and the HAES people using this, because on top of completely missing the point of the Starvation Project, they completely misunderstand why the project was done in the first place. And for you to better understand why this is so important to know, the Minnesota Starvation Project was done between the years of 1944 and 1945, which for those of you who actually paid attention in history class would know that that's during the wind down of World War II. We're still active in the war, I think, and I want to say the war ended around 45. So there's that. If you don't remember what was happening in World War II, fat acceptance and HAES people, we were fighting a group of people who were not good people and who were taking another group of people, actually several groups of people, putting them in what we call concentration camps and effectively starving them to death. It wasn't a great time. And we, the Allied forces, were working against the Axis to free these people. And once they were freed, these camps, when we went in to free people, my grandfather liberated 3 different concentration camps during his time serving. And he wouldn't talk about it. You would think that if you were a hero, he was a hero, but you would think if you felt like you were a hero and that something that you had done required or was worthy of accolade, you think you would mention it. My grandfather never did, because the trauma of liberating these camps was so like long lasting with him that he just didn't talk about it. And when you see pictures about the people who were liberated from these camps, you kind of understand why. These people look like skeletons. I don't have a better way to put that. If you've ever seen Eugenie Clooney, which I'm sure many of you have, that's what everyone looked like, only they weren't trying to be cute for the camera. They were barely alive. And yet somehow miraculously were still alive. Many of them were not. So this is why when I hear fat acceptance and HAES use the Minnesota Starvation Project, why I get so irritated is because the project was done in order to understand the effects of long-term starvation on the body and to find a way to help these people recover. Because one of the things that they started discovering when we liberated a camp and we started refeeding the captives there's a thing called refeeding syndrome, and basically you would think if you have a starving person, the first thing you want to do is feed them. Because obviously they're starving, they need food. Unfortunately, the body sometimes is weird, and there's an imbalance that occurs with electrolytes in the system when you refeed someone who has been severely starved over a long period of time, and effectively the body rejects all of the nutrients and it can actually kill you. So we were having this paradox. We were freeing these people who had been starved, we're trying to refeed them, and it's not working. There was a decision to create a study to mimic the conditions that people in the concentration camps or people in areas of Europe that were undergoing severe starvation due to crop failure or just restriction to resources by totalitarian governments, that we wanted to be able to control the study so that when we started to refeed the individuals who we starved, we could have them in a more controlled situation, and we would know from start to finish exactly what was going on. Again, this kind of a study could not happen, I think, in the modern era, just because these guys, God bless every single one of them, okay? The project itself, the project itself started in November of 1944. Again, the primary aim was to understand the physiological and psychological effects of prolonged dietary restriction, aka starving, and the process of refeeding the individual. So the participants in the study, there were 36 conscientious objectors who volunteered to do this study. Now, there were over 200 applicants, all of which were conscientious objectors. And if you don't know what that is, it's someone who objected to going to war. They were men of age who could have been serving. Did we draft people? I don't remember. But either way, these guys wouldn't go to war because they objected with the concept of war, of killing individuals. You know, they didn't like it, so they weren't going to go participate in it. However, they were totally okay with contributing in other ways. And this study was one of the ways that they were allowed to participate, that they were able to participate without going against their morals, their personal morals and ethics. So of the 200-ish applicants, 36 individuals were picked. And all of them were picked because they were already in acceptable or good physical health. All right, so all of these 36 guys who were picked were all, for the time period, for 1944, were considered healthy, really well healthy. Not like, Adonises of the time. They were just an average healthy male. This is important. So these 36 guys, they were housed in the southern tower of the University of Minnesota's football stadium. So if you go to the University of Minnesota and you see the football stadium and you ever see the South Tower, that's where these guys were living. They lived in a dorm-style environment that was very controlled. They weren't allowed to bring in outside food. If they had visitors, it was very, very controlled. Mainly because the importance of this study hinged on making sure that these guys starved. And the body doesn't like that, and if you have, as we find out, if the body can figure out a way to get what it thinks is food and nutrients into it, it's gonna try. It'll play dirty with your mind. We'll find this out later. All right, so the Minnesota Starvation Project was broken up into 3 different phases. The first week was the first 12 weeks of the study, and this was called the control phase. And during the control phase, participants consumed around 3,200 calories a day, depending on the individual. It's interesting in this study how individualized the diets were depending on who the individual was, because some of the guys did better and needed fewer calories, and some of the guys needed more calories. And they controlled for that because it was very important that these guys lose 25% of their current body weight. Like, I'm not joking, you guys. This was a literal starvation experiment. So for 12 weeks, they were basically well fed. For the next 24 weeks after the 12, and it was a light switch. It wasn't like they gradually led them into this. No, they were being fed their daily rations, and then the next day, bam. Their daily rations their caloric intake was reduced to around 1,570 calories, depending on the individual. Again, this is very individualized. Excuse me, it's cold. The diet mimicked the European famine conditions that were going on and the conditions in the concentration camps. Okay? After that 24 weeks of starvation, there was a recovery phase that was another 12 weeks. And the recovery phase was broken up into two different groups. One group was allowed to eat anything and everything. The second group had a more controlled reintroduction to food. And we're going to take a break. I'll be right back. We are currently in the Morse Arboretum. We are off one of the trails. As you can see, we are meant to be here, but here we are. We're going to enjoy the setting sun as we cover the rest of the Minnesota Starvation Project. So I believe we talked about the 3 phases of the Minnesota Starvation Project, being the control phase, the starvation phase, and the recovery phase, all right? So on top of cutting the participants' calories down almost in half, if not more for some people, the participants still had to do labor-style tasks like chopping wood, carrying large objects around. They had to walk at least 22 miles a day individually. They gardened, they performed lab tests and housekeeping in the dorm, and they were also encouraged to take classes at the university because they wanted to study the cognitive effects of long-term starvation. Obviously, this project affected everybody differently, which is what they wanted to see, which is why they had a number of people and not just like 5 kind of a thing. So the important thing that I want you to take away from this is that it wasn't just that they cut the participants' calories down to 1,500 calories a day. Remember, that's a variation across, because it does say in some of the literature that some of them were losing weight too fast, and some of them weren't losing weight at all, or weren't losing weight as fast as they needed to. And so, of course, the diets were adjusted that way. They weren't trying to kill anybody. But on top of cutting the calories and putting them on a very limited diet, it's not like they received a low caloric diet of balanced nutrition. They received a diet that made up of things like mostly potatoes, turnips, other low quality root vegetables, very little meat, very little animal products, very high in carbs and starches, because those were the foods that would have been available in Europe during famine phases. And again, the point of this study was to see the long-term effects of starvation because of the famines that were hitting Europe at the time, along with the rescue of the concentration victims. So not only are they eating a low-calorie diet, but they're also eating a low-quality diet. And then on top of all of that, they're also being put under mental and physical stress, like not normal, not everyday amounts of physical stress. Keep in mind, though the goal here is to lose weight, because they wanted them to lose 25% of their mass, they're not doing exercises, okay? They're not going to the gym, and they're not trying to get abs or any of this kind of stuff. Most of them lost muscle because of severe starvation. So taking all this into consideration, the results of the test were successful as far as seeing the effects of long-term starvation on individuals. So the physical and psychological effects included things such as significant weight loss, obviously that was the goal, muscle wasting, reduced BMR, cardiovascular changes and stressors, edemas, endocrine changes, and gastrointestinal issues. Basically, all of the body functions that require decent and good and constant nutrition broke down. And psychologically, they call the gut the second brain because they're finding more and more that the health of your gut and the microbiome inside of your gut actually has a lot of effects on your mood and your emotional regulation and pretty much everything that has to do with emotions and that kind of stuff. So it is today no surprise that the psychological effects encompass things like obsessions with food. Again, remember these guys were highly observed, so their only meals came from the lab. They weren't allowed to eat outside of that, and they were monitored at all times. So even when these guys were going and doing their 22-mile walks, or when they were going to their classes, they were basically followed and observed so that they had no chances of sneaking out and grabbing food. Because again, the point of this is to starve them, but they're living in what was then the modern world, so their ability to get food wasn't difficult. So there were obviously mood disturbances. They said cognitive impairments, decreased social interaction. They're tired. They have no energy. They're cranky. They're starving. Neurotic behaviors and reduced libido. How did they measure that? Of all of the things on this list, this was one of the things they were concerned about. Okay, but it's no wonder, knowing what we know today about modern nutrition and how it affects the body, especially your gut biome and your stomach, basically. These findings are not surprising, but at the time, this was groundbreaking. We didn't know any of this. We didn't understand the connection between the gut and the brain. And we didn't for a long time past this point. We just knew that severe starvation led to this. And because of this study, we were able to start investigating the hows and the whys of it. Okay, we got a lot out of this for various different reasons. But again, keep in mind the point of this study was, again, to study the long-term effects of starvation. This isn't a diet. They're not studying these guys to see how healthy they can get at 15,000 calories or less a day. That's not the goal of this. All right, so the findings, these are important. Participants lost 25% of their body weight during the starvation phase. That, again, was the goal. Recovery from starvation was complex, with both physical and psychological challenges. Again, they broke the group, the 36 guys, it was 36, right? Yeah. They broke the 36 guys down into two recovery groups. One group was allowed to eat whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and the other group was more measured and controlled in their refeeding phase. And again, this is when they started seeing the effects of the refeeding syndrome. And because they were able to observe these guys from the beginning to the end, they knew exactly what was happening and they could correct for it. Again, none of these guys died, okay? Did some of them have long-term effects? Yes, which is again why this kind of study couldn't happen today. Rapid refeeding, again, remember, one of the groups was allowed to just eat as their recovery. So the rapid refeeding could lead to refeeding syndrome, which is a condition marked by electrolyte imbalances. Electrolyte imbalances, I know it sounds like, oh, electrolytes, just drink some Gatorade. Electrolyte imbalances can be lethal if in extremes. And the problem with refeeding is with the refeeding syndrome is it does knock you into those incredibly dangerous imbalance zones of your electrolytes. I'm not saying you, the average person, needs to run out and start guzzling Gatorade, because you don't. You probably don't even need it. But these are people, again, who are coming out of severe starvation. Again, I want you to keep an image of Eugenie Clooney in your mind if you know who she is, because everybody's always constantly like, oh, she needs an intervention. Oh, she just needs to eat. Somebody needs to just go over to her house and just feed her food. Chances are that's actually going to do more damage, unfortunately. So, and we know that now because of these tests. Because of the observations that were made between the two refeeding groups, the guidelines for rehabilitating malnourished individuals were set, and we learned and understood more about how to successfully help people recover from these life-threatening levels of starvation. Okay? Again, the body is just amazing in how much trauma and damage it can take and still function. These guys definitely showed that, and anybody who survived from these experiences is definitely a testament to that. Now, that being said, there were long-term effects on these 36 individuals. I'm not saying that everybody was long-term affected, but several of them did continue to have problems even after recovery. And the one place in the park that is the noisiest. So, we're going to knock this out. So, the long-term effects of the study on the individuals are not as studied as we would have liked, and not as studied as they would be if someone tried to pull this off today. Which, again, I don't believe that could happen at all. Out of the 36 participants, 32 made it all the way to the end. 4 of them had to be let go for various reasons. One guy got a really bad urinary infection and had to be let go because of the complications of that skewing his results in the end, or the fear that it might. The other 3 were let go because of they were sneaking food. Now, one guy thought he was being clever and was going to malt shops and ice cream parlors when he didn't think he was being followed, which, again, they were all being followed for this exact reason. The other 2, they began stealing food. One guy was stealing raw rutabagas and eating the rutabagas raw because he became so food obsessed, and the other individual began taking food from the trash to eat. So the reason why I bring this up is because these 2 individuals became so stressed and so food obsessed over the starvation that they went through that they turned to eating behaviors that would otherwise be abnormal. I don't feel like their overall physical results were excluded from the end result of the experiment, but I don't think their mental results should have been excluded, and because of the article they weren't. It was made note as to why they left the experiment, and it was because they couldn't complete it in the manner that it was meant to be completed in. There was also something about chewing gum, and all of the participants were allowed to chew gum, but I guess you're not really supposed to swallow chewing gum. And I guess they began to eat the chewing gum, basically. But again, this is an abnormal eating behavior. We all know that chewing gum it's not something that your body's going to digest. But that sensation of being full was more important to them than the nutritional value of what they were eating. And again, this goes back to the mental stressors of starvation on your body. Your brain will play dirty tricks on you to get you to eat. All of these guys were in physical perfection, and that's the wrong word. All of these guys were physically healthy and deemed mentally healthy when they began this experiment. Now, long term, the guys, of course, were given a 3-month rehabilitation period in the study. So their rehabilitation over a 3-month period was recorded as part of the study. But long term, there were longer, the effects of the study overall hit each one of the guys differently in the long term. The estimates for how long it took to fully recover ranged from 2 months after the experiment. So this is after the 3 months during the experiment. So 2 extra months past that to 2 years for some of them. After that 2-year period, the gentlemen were asked if they felt like there were any other long-term effects. These guys were all interviewed long after this experiment, and they all pretty much said they didn't feel like there were any long-term effects, but the recovery from the physical and mental stress of the Starvation Project took some of them 2 years to recover from. A couple of them just obsessed over food, and they could just never feel full, so they were constantly eating. Another guy put on a lot of weight, and he was like, yeah, it's all fat because I haven't put on any muscle because there's no muscle to put on. He's like, it's all flat. But he did manage to recover that lost muscle again over a 2-year period after the 3 months of recovery during the experiment. All of the guys were interviewed, or most of the guys were interviewed in an article called They Starved So Others Could Survive. They Starved So Others... I got this one. They Starved So That Others Be Fed. This is the dumbest title. They Starved So That Others Be Better Fed. Remembering Ancel Keys and the Minnesota Experiment. These guys were all interviewed, or at least their interviews were recorded in this paper, and I'll try to remember to leave a link down because it's important to leave your sources. But pretty much all of them were like, yeah, we'd do it again if we were 24. Which also says a lot about the impact of the Starvation Project. These guys were all young. These guys were all of age to serve during World War II, but because of basically their religious beliefs, they were Quakers and Mennonites, and I think the one guy that went all the way through the law program that I was telling you about, I think he was like the only Jewish guy on the troop, but don't quote me on that one. It was just an interesting like sidebar that I saw briefly. Anyway, they were young, so they're in their early to mid 20s. And they spent a year in that period doing massive amounts of damage to their bodies for science's sake, for the sake of the world, honestly. And if you had taken those 36 guys and put 10 to 20 years of age on them, I think the experiment would have went drastically different. And again, we will just have to guesstimate on that one because the Minnesota Starvation Experiment is not an experiment that can be done in the modern day. We as a society just won't allow it to happen. Even though these guys were fully warned at the beginning, all 200 of them that applied were fully warned that this was going to be awful and it was going to be difficult and that they were going to be watched like hawks. It's still not enough of a safeguard for today's standards, okay? So now we know what the Minnesota Starvation Project was, why it occurred, and how the results affected things. The results of this experiment saved lives, could have saved hundreds. The results of the experiment are continuously used in various other studies going forward, probably still used today in certain types of studies. So the long-term reaching effects of this experiment are actually pretty impressive. And it's because this was a groundbreaking study that can never be done again. We used to be able to get away with a lot of shit back in the day, let me just put it that way. Now, fat acceptance and HAES. I don't know who started using this experiment as reasons for people to not go on a diet. But I wish I could find that individual because that person is the one that's on my list the highest. To take something as, I would say, heroic as the Minnesota Starvation Project. Remember, these are guys who objected to going to the war front, but were still willing to put their lives at risk to do an experiment that would help the recovery of other individuals who were being affected by the war. All right, these guys are war heroes. So whoever this fat acceptance HAES person was who started using this experiment as a reason for people to not go on diets, it's insulting to the guys who did this experiment. And I think if you went to any of the 36 of them, even the 4 that didn't make it, I think if you went to them and you were like, hey, there are people out here today that are using the experiment that you participated in as a reason for people to never go on a diet, I think all of them would laugh in your face, just judging by how my grandfather would have reacted, okay? So, ooh, a limo. Fancy. So what has happened is someone somewhere half listened to whatever this Minnesota Starvation Project was. They saw the word starvation, they briefly looked at it, they half-assedly looked at the experiment and the results. They cherry-picked what they wanted out of it, completely ignored the purpose and the overall results of the experiment, and they just decided to start using it as rhetoric against people who want to diet. Because we all know that, you know, being 600 pounds is perfectly healthy, you guys. So that kind of crap is the reason why I wanted to do this video, because I want people to watch this and understand that this experiment that keeps getting pushed out there as a reason for why you, the individual, the normal individual, shouldn't cut your calories if you're trying to lose weight, this has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with being fat. It has nothing to do with weight loss. This is not a weight loss experiment. This was a starvation experiment. A weight loss experiment would be all of the studies that have been done that show that cutting your diet by 500 calories, if you're eating above 2,000, will help you lose weight. Because of studies like this and studies like the one I just mentioned, we know that the average person should not bring their calories below 1,200. If you're eating 1,100 calories, you're doing it wrong. You're putting yourself in danger. Okay? So when you hear one of these fat acceptance or these HAES people and they're online and they're like, I can only lose weight if I eat 900 calories a day. No, you'd be dead. That's even fewer calories than they were starving adult men on. You do the math. But I guess general physics doesn't apply to people in fat acceptance and HAES, so I don't know what to tell you. They live outside of the rules of the natural world. But I hope you guys got some good information out of this. I hope the links down below will help you out. I would personally really like to see people confront FA and HAES when they're using the Starvation Project as part of their rhetoric for why diets don't work. I would really like to see people use this video or use the links that I'm providing to confront that rhetoric. One, it's insulting. It really is insulting to the people that did the experiment. And I'm not talking about the scientists that put it together and did all the analysis and that kind of stuff. Yes, those people were very important as well. I'm talking about the guys that literally put their lives on the line to starve themselves halfway to death. It's insulting to these guys. This was a big deal, all right? Even the 4 that didn't make it, they still signed up for it, okay? That was a huge step. So it's insulting to those guys. It's also insulting to all of the people that this study was designed to help in the long run. The people who were starving from famine during the war, the people who were put into concentration camps and basically starved down to living skeletons. It's insulting to them as well. It's basically saying that, like, it's basically negating that their experience happened. And fat acceptance and HAES that seems to be like their MO. They love to take chunks of history and really just twist them in these disgusting ways and use them as arguments for the modern day as to why they should stay fat. The end of the argument is, if you want to be 600 pounds, be 600 pounds. It's not good for you. We know it's not good for you, but you're an individual. If that's what you want to do with your life, We can't stop you. And I wouldn't try to if I could. You know, it's your life. It doesn't impact me. But the spreading of misinformation, the use of traumatic global incidences like World War II, like the Holocaust, like ethnic cleansing, comparing diets to rape. I'm proud of it. This video probably just got demonetized, but this is disgusting and it's bad behavior, and people who know better, like I hope you do after watching this video, should be confronting that kind of rhetoric because it's dangerous in the long run. This kind of misinformation getting out there negates the impact of these events on our global experience, and it contributes to ignorance towards these events, which can lead to erasure. And I hope you guys understand that erasing the memory of these events from our global consciousness is what dictators want to happen. People who want to repeat history, they don't want you to remember this part of history because then you're on to them. And as I'm sure I'm going to get pushback for this, but shit like what HAES is pulling, Fat Acceptance and HAES is pulling with the Starvation Project, it's like a domino effect. It trivializes these parts of history, and once you've trivialized something, it's easier to dismiss it, and once you can dismiss something, you can repeat it without consequence. Y'all can say that maybe I'm being hyperbolic, that's fine, but I don't think you have to go too far back in our own modern history to see that series of events occur. Anyway, now that I've ended this on a downer note, if you've liked the video, I'm not going to play the emoji game. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave like a thumbs up or something in the the comment section, or just whatever your favorite emoji is. Let me know how you're feeling by an emoji. But more than anything, if you feel the need to comment, please do. Please try to remain adults. Try to be kind to each other. This is a very heavy topic. I understand that, and I made it a lot heavier at the end, and I don't apologize for that, but I do understand that it's going to bug a couple people probably that I did that. Also keep in mind that if I feel like your comment is trolling or that it's like inflammatory just for the purposes of being inflammatory, I will probably delete it. And I shouldn't have to say these things to adults, but apparently I do. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. This is one of the videos that if you guys wanted to share it around, I would be honored, actually. I would love to see people use my video as a counter to this stupid argument. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. I will be doing more of this style of video in the future just because there are other topics that they talk about, like, well, things I'm not going to repeat, but we'll get to them, I promise. And yeah, I have a feeling that these videos will probably get demonetized just because of the topics, but your support on the video means a lot to me anyway. So, all right, that's enough of that. I will see everybody on the next one. I hope you enjoyed this, and bye!